"That's weird," said Jess. "It's not on Google Maps. I keep typing in the bucket of holly, Slaughterford, and it's just coming up with that Wheel of Doom thingy, then not found." "Try Waze," said Luke. "Darling, I did Waze first. It's not on Waze either. Everything's on Waze." He sounded exasperated. "Look, let's just get ourselves to the village and I'm sure someone will know where the hotel is. It's going to be lovely when we get there." Jess tried typing in boutique hotel. 0. She put her phone away and gazed out of the car window. The sun was almost gone, and the countryside was silhouetted against the sky. How romantic, she mused to herself. This trip was exactly what she'd hoped for, a heavenly, crisp, cold, Boxing Day night spent with her boyfriend in a dreamy little hotel in the Cotswolds. Half an hour later, a smile crept across Jess's face as they pulled into the charming village of Slaughterford. She gazed longingly at a grand Georgian rectory as they drove past. She imagined cozy scenes inside stone-fronted cottages, now lit with Christmas lights. She couldn't wait to get to the hotel and the cream tea it had promised on its gorgeous website. Jess would be forever grateful to her old school friend Char, who'd nominated her for Radio HP. She got such good links from that website since everything on it was recommended by Sloaney. People like Char. Jess knew that most of the recommendations were safe. TripAdvisor it was not, thank God. The car soon exited the village. "Where's the hotel?" said Luke. They hadn't seen the bucket of holly along the way. "Shall we just ask someone?" Jess inquired, looking out at the lane, but there wasn't a soul in sight. Luke sighed. He swerved suddenly and pulled up the car. He picked up his iPhone and said to it, "Siri, where's the bucket of holly?" "I'm having trouble connecting to the internet," came the familiar flat tone. "Well, it's very romantic, not having Wi-Fi," Luke declared happily, tossing the device onto the back seat. I guess." Jess was unsure. Something felt odd. Suddenly, it was getting darker. The phone not working. Maybe she'd have a gin and tonic instead of a cup of tea when she got to the hotel. That would make her feel miles better. The hotel was bound to have Hendrix. Just then there was a thump on the back window. Jess jumped. She craned her head around and looked behind her. She couldn't see much now, it was so dark. Suddenly a man's face appeared in Luke's window. Jess could make out shadowy hollows under the man's hooded eyes. "Luke," she gasped. "Don't open the window. Don't be so dramatic, darling. He's bound to know where the hotel is." He opened his window. "Evening," Luke said to the man, cheery. The man leaned on the windowsill and stared. After a few uncomfortable moments, Luke said, "You don't know the bucket of holly by chance, do you?" "Get out of my gateway," the man barked angrily in a West Country accent. Now, Jess could vaguely make out a wooden 5-bar gate behind the man. "God, sorry," Luke said apologetically. "It's so dark I didn't notice it. We only stopped because we're lost. You couldn't direct us to the hotel, could you?" The man slowly shook his head. "Hotel? There's no hotel here." "The boutique hotel?" said Jess, hoping. "There aren't no boutiques either." Jess noticed that he was dressed in a thick, fraying tweed overcoat. "But we read about it. It's called the bucket of holly." "The bucket?" the man interrupted. "Ah, I know the bucket. You've driven straight past it. If you turn around and go back exactly the way you came, you'll see it right in the center of the village. There's a big well in front of it. You can't miss it." "Thanks a lot," said Luke. They drove back the way they came. Jess couldn't fathom how on earth they'd missed the hotel. There it was in front of them, in the heart of the village. As the man had said, there was indeed an ancient well in front of the building, a large round, stone-built structure. An old pub sign hung above it. It was too dark to see closely, but Jess could make out a painting of an old pail, with some red dabs painted above it. "The hollyberry," she presumed. It all looked a bit knackered, she thought ruey. So much for the boutique bit. But she tried to be positive. Perhaps this was a well-considered look, faded authenticity, that had been already achieved by some fabulous London decorator. "Wow, this is great," said Luke, getting out of the car. He looked at the building ahead with a huge smile on his face, then popped open the boot and grabbed their bags. Jess was impressed with Luke's upbeat attitude. There were a few dodgy fairy lights strewn over the porch, and the hotel looked tiny, just a couple of small windows on the ground floor and what looked like one floor above the 4 bedrooms. As Luke opened the door to their lodgings, A mewling kitten peeled out and scarpered across the entrance. Luke almost trod on it. "Look out," yelped Jess. "What?" said Luke, puzzled. "That sweet little kitten," Jess went on. He looked confused. "It just ran straight in front of you. You nearly squashed it." "Didn't even see it. How peculiar," thought Jess, once they were inside. Just a rather bare, old pub. The seating consisted of wooden benches with high backs pushed up against the wall, or hard wooden chairs. There were a few tables lit by candles and old wine bottles, at which sat a couple of punters in grubby-looking farm clothes. Sawdust covered the red-tiled floor. There was rustic glamour, but then there was just plain rural. There was absolutely no way Jess was going to be able to stay up all night having with if the bedrooms were as cold as it was in here. "Wow, brilliant," said Luke, looking round him. "Isn't it great, Jess? So charming." Sometimes, Jess did feel as though she and Luke were living on two different planets. How could he call this charming? But perhaps she was just being dready, spoiled and ungrateful. She decided not to say anything. "I'll go and check us in. Will you order me a GT, darling?" asked Luke. Luke wandered off, around a corner, presumably to the check-in desk. Jess found herself alone at the bar. She sat on a stool, facing a shelf with a few bottles on it. There didn't seem to be anyone around to serve her. After a few minutes, a girl appeared, dressed in old dungarees. She couldn't have been more than 13. This was the weirdest hotel ever, Jess decided. Child labor, no decor. Maybe it was a trend. She'd probably read about it in World of Interiors in 6 months. "Could I have 2 gin and tonics?" asked Jess. Then she added, "Hendrix, please." "Come again?" said the girl. "Hendrix gin? We just got gin," the girl said. "All right. Sure," said Jess. Clearly Hendrix hadn't reached Slaughterford yet. A few minutes later, 2 neat gins in hand, Jess strolled round to an empty booth. She sat down, putting one drink in front of her and the other on the opposite side of the table for Luke while she waited for him. She took a glug of her drink. God, neat gin was strong. But perhaps she was better off tipsy than sober tonight. Instinctively, Jess rifled in her bag for her iPhone. She retrieved it and then suddenly remembered it wouldn't work here. She put it back. When she looked up again, she got a shock. The man from the gateway was sitting opposite her. He stared at her from under those hooded lids. Jess was taken aback. How had he got here before her and Luke? The man picked up the glass and downed Luke's gin in one swig. "Excuse me, that was for my boyfriend," exclaimed Jess. "Well, he's not around, is he?" "Actually, he's just checking in," replied Jess. "Eh? We're staying the night. He's sorting out the hotel room. There aren't rooms here." "What?" Jess was starting to feel confused. No one would stay here. After what happened, a rising sense of panic was overtaking her. Perhaps she should get up and leave. But somehow she couldn't. The man's eyes were boring into her, rooting her to the bench. And Jess's curiosity was such that she couldn't resist asking, "What happened?" "You should be gone. Get out while you're all right. There's blood here." "Blood?" Jess gulped, scared. "Just go," he replied. Jess wouldn't leave now. She loved a good story. She could dine out on this for months. "I want to know what happened." It was Christmas. Almost 100 years ago. Just after the war. The landlord here, John Damsel, he was back from the front. He wasn't right. Shell shock, that's what everyone said about him. He had terrible fits, drank a lot to cover up. When he was behind the bar, he was all smiles, life and soul, but behind closed doors, well. The man fell silent. He screwed up his face and rubbed a hand across his forehead a few times, looking pained. As I was saying, for his wife and child it was hell. Deaths, violence, threats. Went on for years. Jess thought she noticed the man's eyes looking watery. Maybe he was staring up. Perhaps it was the gin. Perhaps he was drunk. Maybe this story was just an alcoholic rant. Anyway, Mrs. Damsel, she loved him, but the drinking, it was all the time in the end. He shouted. "Beat her. Beat the kid." "How do you know all this?" interrupted Jess. "All came out at the trial." Jess leaned forward, curious. She confessed, said she'd killed him on Christmas night. The only time the inn was closed. "How terrible," said Jess. "How did Damsel die?" "The wife said she cut his throat while he was sleeping, drunk. She was hanged." Jess wondered what had happened to her child. Everyone knew Mrs. Damsel was lying. How? They never found her husband's body. Just a carving knife covered in blood. Ugh, Jess shuddered. I wonder what she did with him. The man put his elbows on the table and leaned forward towards Jess. He's in the well, the man whispered. He's still in the well. Jess was starting to freak out. But that's crazy, she said. A woman would never be able to lift a man's body and shove it down a well alone. Course not, said the man. But he's down there all right. What do you mean? It was Boxing Day, and one of the damsel's scullery maids dropped a pail down the well to fetch water. When she brought the bucket up, it was filled with blood. That's why this pup is called the bucket of blood. The bucket of holly, Jess corrected him, somewhat hoping. Suddenly Jess felt very cold. She had the sensation that her body was shrinking and the walls of the pub was closing in on her. She noticed something dripping down the wall in the corner closest to her. Panicked, Jess looked back at the man. This all sounds mad, she said, trying to sound confident. It was. Mrs. Damsel was driven insane by that man. But how do you know all of this? It was all so long ago. You need to go, said the man. He's here. The son. He helped her and he's still here. Dead but not dead. Something made Jess look up at the ceiling again. Now a dark substance was dripping from it onto the table in front of her. It was dark red. Jess screamed. She looked around her. The walls of the pub were ringed with blood. You're the boy